Hi everyone, I'm Julia and welcome back to Zealous English. This is episode 5 in the series now, and you are in for a treat. This vlog comes to you as a request from one of my Year 9 EAL students. Her name is Lisa, and she asked me if I could talk about Shakespeare. So today's vlog is all about tackling Shakespeare as an EAL learner. The most important thing to remember when you're studying Shakespeare as an EAL learner is that it's not as hard as you think it might be. So we're in term 3 and we are exploding with Shakespeare. I don't know why, but Shakespeare always seems to fall in term 3. Year 8s are currently starting with A Midsummer Night's Dream. Our Year 9s, Romeo and Juliet, and our Year 10s, Macbeth. So it's like a Shakespeare attack at the moment. And it doesn't stop there. Once you get into Year 11 and 12, it's very likely that you will come across a Shakespeare text at some stage or play at some shades. So it's really important to remember that these are plays. Shakespeare wrote these plays as a form of entertainment in the late 1500s, early 1600s, so 16th and 17th century. Because at that time, people had no other real form of entertainment, particularly the lower classes and the peasants. They couldn't read. There was limited access to books. They weren't educated, so they would trundle along to the Globe Theatre, if possible, if they could get a ticket, and go and watch one of these wonderfully entertaining plays. It's also really important to remember that there are different types of plays, moving from comedies, plays that entertain us and make us laugh, to tragedies, plays that involve a character who has some type of downfall, to mixed genres such as tragicomedies. So it's really important to know what type of play or genre of play you are specifically studying as well. It's also really important to remember that at the time, they didn't speak in verse. They didn't speak in this poetic style of language that these plays are written in. These plays were masterfully crafted by a master of language who wrote in a very unique way to show and reveal his mastery of language. So part of interpreting these plays is all about interpreting the language that is presented and how all of these words come together to create meanings. So we're going to go through a few tips today. And remember, it's not as hard as you think it is. So my first tip is don't pick up the play and just start reading it straight off the bat. That is going to confuse you completely. You really need to do your groundwork here. You need to get to know what this play is about before you actually start to read it. So read a synopsis of the plot. Make sure you know the setting, the time period in which it was set, because Shakespeare is very famous for setting his plays in the past. He was fascinated with time periods before his time in particular. As I mentioned earlier, the genre, the type of play, is it a tragedy? Is it a comedy? Is it a romance? And who are the characters, the key characters in this play? What key events happen along the way as well? So my second tip is that you read these scene synopses and act synopses as they progress through the play, step by step along the way. So you read the act synopsis and then the scene synopsis prior to reading the actual text itself. Make sure you know what happens in that act and what happens in that scene before you actually pick up the play. It will really make a big difference for you. And there are multiple links and web pages with synopses out there. I don't need to tell you where to find them. They are easily accessible and your teachers should provide these to you as well. The next best thing that you can do is then to watch that act and that scene being acted out. Remember, these are plays. They were designed to be performed. So you need to see the performance. So my next tip is to get onto YouTube or digital theatre or look at the Royal Shakespeare Theatre Company's or the BBC series versions of these plays being performed. And do it in stages, do it in chunks. Don't just sit back and watch the whole thing for pleasure. Make sure you do it scene by scene, act by act, build up your overall understanding of the events that happen in these plays step by step. My next tip is that while you are watching the production, the performance of these plays, be very observant. You need to look very carefully at the movements of the characters, what is happening in terms of positioning, stage direction, where are they standing, whom are they talking to. This is very important because these are plays, they are performances. The only way that we can find out the inner thoughts of the key characters is when they either turn to an aside or they give a soliloquy. That's a monologue directly addressing the audience, revealing their inner thoughts and their inner emotions, desires. So you need to look very carefully and watch and listen at those particular times as well. Also looking for transitions between scenes and between acts. At what point does one act finish and the next act finish? At what point does one scene finish and the next scene finish and transition on to the next one? My next tip is to develop your Shakespeare meta language. There is a language around Shakespeare and our study of Shakespeare. It's really important that you have a deep understanding and awareness of words like soliloquy, aside, iambic pentameter, prose, verse, dramatic irony, tragedy. This type of language really encompasses the world of Shakespeare, and you need to develop that language and incorporate that language in your analyses as well. My fifth tip. Sometimes we get so confused by the language, whether that play is a combination of verse and prose or that it is predominantly written in verse, as some of Shakespeare's plays are, that we get so confused by this metaphorical language that we can't actually understand what Shakespeare is saying word by word. And it's impossible. You will not, particularly as an EAL learner, you will not understand Shakespeare by reading every word and every line and then translating. It's an impossible task to do. So some students find it more comfortable to read what we call a translation of the play into simple or plain English, and there are printed copies of these. So some students like to use these No Fear Shakespeare versions, and there are also online versions of these, and that can help, okay, but we don't want to be reliant on this, because when it comes to writing our assessments, that we need to be incorporating quotations and evidence from the actual play and not the translation. So be careful not to fall into that trap as well. The other thing that's really important in whatever version that you use, or whatever copy or printed copy of the play that you have, that you will notice that inside, for example, in this copy of A Midsummer Night's Dream, is that there are annotations down the side. And so some students find it helpful to get multiple versions of the play. So here's my 3 copies of Macbeth that I have, that all have different annotations in there along the side. So the more annotations you have, the better. Go to your library, have a look at what versions you have, and it might be beneficial for you to use an additional version or adaptation of the play to the one that you're looking at in class. My next tip, and this is a bit of a fun one, is for you to get together a group of friends, get together a couple of mates, and actually act out certain scenes or key scenes of these plays. These are plays, they need to be read aloud, so adding emphasis to the language, hearing how this language sounds, and often in class you'll be assigned different roles and you'll hear different students acting certain parts out, because what this does is it really develops your understanding of how the play is structured and those transitions, how the characters speak to each other, how we can hear the emotion in the language as well, the voices, the motivations of these characters, and get involved. Something else that's a little bit fun that I actually came across today in my preparation of putting this vlog together was that we have these wonderful little finger puppets, and you can do a simple Google search for Shakespeare finger puppets such as Macbeth or Romeo and Juliet finger puppets, and you can act out scenes from the play. And that helps you to understand the movements of the characters, what's happening in that particular scene, and how it's really flowing together and the interactions between the characters. It sounds a little bit silly, but it is a little bit fun. So here's my rendition of the Romeo and Juliet balcony scene. So excuse my language and embarrassment, but here we go. So we've got Romeo, who's down here in the garden, and Juliet, who's up here on her balcony, all pensive because she's just had this encounter with this young man. She doesn't know who he is, and she's all love-struck and excited. And then she's up here and she said, "Oh, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo? Deny thy father and refuse thy name, or if thou wilt not be but sworn by me, and I'll no longer be a Capulet." Romeo's down here. He hears, "Shall I hear more? Or shall I speak at this?" So it can be a little bit fun. Give it a go. You might get a kick out of it. And finally, at the end, it's really, really important, and I've talked about this in my last video about reading strategies, that when you are reading through the play, that you've got your highlighters and you've got your pens out and you're annotating and taking note and very much awareness of key scenes, key quotes, key characters, and that you're tabbing your book. So if you look on the sides of some of the plays that I've been studying over the years, you'll see that I've got my tabs for my acts and my scenes. You'll see that I've also got on the side here key soliloquies, asides, key scenes in here. So this is my copy of Richard II and Julius Caesar. So for example, here in Julius Caesar, I've got the key speeches of Brutus and Cassius, Antony, I should say. That those are really important parts of that particular play. And my copy of Macbeth, I've got the acts down the side here so that I can easily reference as I'm going through my study and preparation for my assessment, that I can find those key scenes and easily get to the acts as they're coming through. I've mentioned that you might want to look at different versions, and I showed my 3 versions as well, with the annotations in there. You know, that's up to you, but certainly as you're going through, you really need to be not just highlighting, but annotating. You know, we want to see annotation. We don't just want to see highlighting. We want to think about what this means, okay, and why we're highlighting these components of the play, what's happening in these scenes, what do you notice, okay, as you're reading through. So you really need to have those glasses on. You really need to have that lens. You need to remember that the language presented in these plays is written in a specific style, mostly written in a combination of prose and verse, which can make that challenging as an EAL learner. We get scared that this is like reading a poetry play, and essentially it is, but we have ways around this. We have ways to get ourselves into the language, to understand what's happening here. But at the end of the day, the most important thing when it comes to studying a Shakespeare play is that you understand the key events that happen in order, in sequence, okay, act by act, scene by scene, the development of the characters, what happens to these characters, and what events trigger certain reactions from these characters. So I wish you all the best with your Shakespeare studies, and please, if you have any further requests or any questions, pop them in the question bar underneath. And I can't wait to catch up with you guys again soon.